In this video, we're going to continue our example with InStyle company, and remember, all we are trying to do now is figure out what the profitability is of each division of InStyle, each department in InStyle basically. We got the women's department over here, then the men's department, and also the children's department. And we have already allocated the direct cost to these three departments. But now we have this indirect cost over here that we need to allocate across the three departments. And this is what we're going to get into in this video. How do you allocate this indirect cost? And allocating indirect cost really gets into behavioral issues. It's not always as simple as picking a way to allocating it and allocating it. Because as you'd probably expect, the managers of each of these three departments are going to have different ways that they think the cost should be allocated. As you can see from the numbers, the women's department looks a lot bigger than the men's department, and the children's department, at least in terms of total direct cost. Their total direct cost is of $141,000, and the children's in that is only of $47,800, which would make you believe that the women's department is much more larger, right? So the women's department may just say, hey, let's just take this indirect cost of $38,160 and let's just divide it by the three departments. Each department will take $12,720, so allocate $12,720 to each department. That is what the manager of the women's department may say. But obviously, the men's department, the children's department are going to say that that's not fair. Your department is much more bigger than our departments, and you should take more of this indirect cost. So you can see that allocating costs really gets into behavioral issues. It's not always a simple thing. You have to work with people and negotiate the best deal for everyone. So let's look at how we can allocate some of these costs. You could pool all three of these together and you get $38,160 and divide it by 3 and just allocate that amount to each department. But we said that that's not fair, right? So let's look at allocating each of these indirect costs individually. Okay, so allocate costs, we will pool them and or do them individually. There are three steps that are involved basically. The first step is to figure out what is it that you are actually allocating, the amount to be allocated. And so this is what it is. We are trying to actually going to allocate this section over here. Then once we decide the what, we have to decide where we are going to allocate it. So next is the where. Where will we allocate the cost? Where will we allocate this whole indirect cost? And we will do that to the cost object. We will allocate it over there. And in this example, we have three cost objects. It's the women's department, the men's department, and the children's department. So the cost object is just what it is you're trying to figure out how much it costs. It could be a product, it could be a service. In this case, it is the three departments. So we have the what that we are trying to allocate, where we're going to allocate, and the third one is how do we allocate it. And we're going to allocate it based on its cost driver. Okay, so we're going to allocate the cost based on what's driving the cost. That's the best way. We will talk about how to select the best cost driver in more detail in the next video. So let's look at an example of how we could actually do this. Let's start with the rental fee of the store. It's $18,400. How do we allocate this across the three departments? We know the rental fee is $18,400, and we know the where, which is the cost object, and that's the three departments. We can see the three departments down here: women's, men's, and children's department. And then we just go and we just got to decide how. And the how is going to be the cost driver, or what's driving the cost. And you can come up with many different cost drivers over here. Often companies use multiple cost drivers, but in this case, maybe we come up with a square feet at the best as the best cost driver because we're talking about the rental fee. How much does it cost us to rent the building? And the rental fee is really determined by square footage. If you really rent a big building, it is going to cost more than what it will if you were to rent a smaller building. So if you were to allocate based on square feet, we would have to look at certain things, which I will talk about next. So the first thing we are going to do is figure out the allocation rate. The allocation rate is going to be what we are going to allocate basically. The allocation rate is just going to be what we're going to allocate, and so the cost to be allocated divided by the cost driver. Now the cost driver is also often called the base. So in this case, the cost to be allocated, the what, is the $18,400 rental fee. And the cost driver, or the how, is the square footage of 23,000. So that is going to give us an allocation rate of 80 cents per square foot. And this 23,000 square footage down here, this is often referred to as the base. So it's the cost driver, or it's the base. So what this allocation rate tells us is that every square foot that the department takes up, we should allocate 80% of the rental fee to that department. So you can see how I broke that down here. So I have the cost object for the women's department. We are going to allocate 80 cents for every square foot. And the women's department takes up 12,000 square feet, right? It's the biggest department, so we're going to allocate $9,600 of the total cost of the women's department. The men's department with 80 cents takes up 7,000 square feet, so 80 times 7,000, we're going to allocate $5,600 of the total cost of the rental fee to the men's department. And for the children's department, it would be 80 times 4,000, and it will give us $3,200 for the children's department. So you can see the total rental fee, if you add this up, is 18,400. And the total square footage of all of these three departments is 23,000. So that's how we would allocate these rental fee costs. We did just one of the indirect costs, the rental fee. We have allocated 9,600 to the women's department, $5,600 to the men's, and $3,200 to the children's department. And we would do it by finding this allocation rate, which is the cost of the allocated divided by the cost driver, and multiplying it by the number of square feet in the department. And this number of square feet, just in terms of terminology, this is often referred to as the weight of base. So the base is the total square footage, that is 23,000, and for the women's department, 12,000 is the weight of the base. For the men's department, 7,000 is the weight of the base, and for the children's department, 4,000 is the weight of the base. So this is how we allocate indirect costs. And in the next video, we will look at it in a little more detail about how to pick the best cost driver.